Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you again for joining us during your lunch for today's session with the Salmon Orca Project Speaker Series. As with every meeting, we always want to start it with a blessing and honor song, and I'd like to invite Ron Suppah, Fish and Wildlife Committee Chairman for the Warm Springs Nation, to come forward and provide that for us today.
Eirk Patwai, Kalapishak, Achai, Tichub, the English with Sidwit, Dabiwa, Tabadwit, Shipte, Tabadwilla, Payuisha, the Titate. I'd like to sing a prayer song this afternoon and pray for all of the tribes. So if you'll bear with me, I'll next we'll take this. Luxemka. with the tub. Kachai.
Hey, Kachai.
The song that I sing today was given to us by our Creator. And when the world was created, we were placed here. And the Creator gave us a voice, and that is the law. Today, I sing this song, which means that during this time of the pandemic and this terrible time that we are losing a lot of our people, the Creator gave us this law that basically states that we do not know when He will call us home. So each day we must prepare ourselves and get ready, because that is the way it is. So I think that if I look into the future of the world and think about the sharing of our brother Dusak, that we will know that our brother does not belong to any of us. The Creator blessed us with that gift to sustain ourselves as one of our sacred foods. And He said that these blessings will be here for as long as we live up to our end of the agreement, which is that we promised that we would be the voice for all of those things that cannot speak for themselves, and we will protect them and help them to survive. That much I say today. Afla hikush.
Yeah, Kachai.
That is all. Thank you.
Kachai.
Thank you so much for those words today. Exactly what we needed to get this session started. Once again, good afternoon. My name is Kaylani Scott. I am the Communications Manager for the Netspurs Tribe. Thank you for spending your lunch hour to join us today. We have a wonderful lineup and agenda for you. Today's subject is No Fishing Without Fish. This is our second of the series. As you all know, we are holding a speaker series the third Wednesday of every month during the lunch hour, so we hope you continue to join us. Today's session really covers the topic of the fact that there is no fishing without fish. Not only what that means culturally and to tribes all across the nation, but that also affects the industry. We have several folks that depend on these fish as a resource to feed their families, to pay the bills, and things of that nature. While we all have different beliefs and cultures and how we go about that, one thing that we do all share is the need for those fish. At a certain point, it was a huge industry, especially in this region. And today that's dwindling and becoming more challenging. So thank you again. To start things off, one thing that really brought us all together in this fashion was the Columbia Basin Initiative. And this month marks the 1-year anniversary of when that was released to the public. Knowing that, we felt it only right to invite Representative Mike Simpson to come forward and provide us a few words. He has certainly been a champion in this effort. We've appreciated the collaboration and partnering through him and his administration to bring this effort forward and really make a change for these salmon and everything that depend on them. Representative Simpson, thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Kaylani, and it's my honor to be with you today for this Salmon Orca project series and talk to you about what's been going on over the last year. But I got to tell you, the theme of this, no fishing without fish, is an appropriate theme. I have said at many different speeches that I've given. One of the reasons that we're doing all this is that every tribe in the Pacific Northwest that I'm aware of, when they made treaties with the United States government, they all reserved their fishing rights at their traditional places of fishing and so forth. Well, those fishing rights don't mean a lot if there's no fish, especially when the reason that the fish are declining is because of actions that we've taken. So we have an obligation, I think, a moral and a legal obligation to restore these fisheries under the treaty rights that tribes have had with the United States government for years and years. But this is, as you mentioned, the 1-year anniversary since we released the Columbia Basin Initiative. We released it as a concept because we wanted people to start this discussion that we've been having for the last year. Some people think that because we didn't get money in the infrastructure bill, that this is kind of dead. That's not true. When we started this, we never knew whether there was going to be an infrastructure bill or not. We thought, well, there's an opportunity. We might be able to get something in it. It wasn't dependent on that by any stretch of the imagination. But I want to thank all of you for the work that you have been doing over the last year to tell people about this, but the importance of this, how we can make a determination of what our future is going to look like and how we can save these salmon runs. Not just over the last year, but for many of you that have been working on this for the last 50 years to make sure that we get this done. Now, it's kind of interesting right now. I will tell you what I've been doing for the last year. That is a lot of things just like this, talking to a lot of different groups, going to different organizations that some support, some don't support what we're trying to do. And so, when we first released it, it would have been nice if everybody would have just thrown up their hands and say, this is wonderful. Why didn't we think of this earlier? And so that's kind of a dream. We didn't expect it to happen. We expected there to be quite a bit of kickback. You got to remember that this plan is not just about saving the salmon runs in the lower Snake River Valley, although that was my original intent when I started. That's what I was mainly focused on because I'm from Idaho and it's our 4 runs of salmon that are endangered because of the dams and so forth. But it expanded to improve the habitat and water quality of all salmon runs in the Pacific Northwest, because there are, I think, 13 different endangered runs that go throughout the Pacific Northwest. So it affects everything from the Puget Sound to the high altitude lakes in Idaho. And that's why it's so broad based. And frankly, when it gets more broad based like this, it makes it sometimes more difficult to pass because there's something anybody can point to that they don't like in it. But overall, I think we've learned a lot over this last year. We've talked to an awful lot of people. And what I'm getting from people is there are a lot of people, as an example, I met an attorney the other day, yesterday, as a matter of fact, and he said, when you came out with this, I was very much opposed to the idea of these dam removals. But as I've listened to you and I've listened to the arguments for and against and so forth, he said, I'm fully behind this right now. And we're starting to see more and more people take that as they stop and really think about the impact of what's going to happen and the need to design our own future in the Pacific Northwest. So that's what I've been doing for the last year. I thank all of you for the incredible work that you've been doing. And I got to tell you, these are what are called, in baseball terms, the dog days of August. It's a long, hard work, but it's that long, hard work that prepares you to win the championship in September. This is the long, hard work that we've got to do, and all of you are a very vital part of getting this done. I want to thank the Netspurs tribe; they have been great partners in this, and Vice Chairman Wheeler has been tremendous to work with, and all of the tribes have been tremendous. I can't speak highly enough of what they've done, and I will say, we wouldn't be talking about this right now if it weren't for the tribes. If it wouldn't have been for the work that the tribes have done over the last 50 years, these salmon would be extinct today. And so I thank you for the work that you've done. Let's get this ball across the goal line and continue working on it. I'm willing to go talk to anyone, anytime, any place, and promote what we're doing and listen to people that have concerns about certain things. This has changed a little bit since we first introduced it, as we've learned more and more as people brought up issues. That's the way it should be. That's why this discussion in the Pacific Northwest is very, very important. So thank you for having this series, and I look forward to our interactions in the future.
Thank you, Representative Simpson. It's always a joy to have you on board and appreciate you taking the time to join us. Of course, this effort is the reason that we're coming forward with the speaker series today. We hope it continues to inform and educate individuals that are willing and able to participate and listen in. As Representative Simpson mentioned, that's what's going to make the change. I think a lot of people are on the fence about this just because it is such a big plan and it's quite comprehensive, but there's something for everybody. And I think it truly is going to make things whole, not only for the people, but for the salmon and those that depend on the salmon as well. So thank you. Up next, we have Eirk Holt. He is the Netspurs Tribes Fish and Wildlife Commission Chairman. He's a lifelong fisherman, and he has some wonderful words to share with you today. I've had the pleasure of listening to him in the past, and I look forward to what he's going to present to us now. Eirk?
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay. Katsiaya, tatalach. Token Timki. Hiyum Tamaluk. Next grizzly bear in line, AKA my English name is Eirk Holt. I'm a Netspurs Tribe Fish and Wildlife Commission Chairman. My parents are Virgil and Sandy Holt. I just wanted to share a little bit first about the history and thinking about what there's no fishing without fish and how that relates to the Netspurs. And, you know, in 66 years ago, in March of 1956, they inundated Salilo Falls. And, you know, that alone, you know, that was the Dallas Dam Agreement. And my grandfather, Lewis Holt, was signatory to that agreement and back in 1956. And you think about, you know, the government from that time to now, 66 years ago, and that Dallas Dam Agreement and the government not fulfilling its obligations, you know, contractually, you know, and signing that agreement. As Mr. Simpson said, you know, in his dialogue that he shared, you know, if it weren't for the tribes and doing what we do, you know, for our treaties and speaking just to the treaties, you know, those are in place and as contracts, you know, and they're the supreme law of the land as with the Constitution. And so those should be upheld, and they've been upheld in numerous courts to solidify our stance, you know, as Netspurs people and as fishers, you know. So I wanted to bring up that part about the Salilo Falls and the commemoration of that, you know, being 66 years ago, you know, inundation of Salilo Falls itself and the ripple effect of that it had on the people of, you know, the Columbia River. You know, we're salmon people, and, you know, we look to the salmon as the first food that offered himself to us in our legends. You know, before the time of humans, the animals spoke, and, you know, they talked about the human being coming of age, and the salmon was the first one to offer himself up to us. You know, it's sacred, and it's the first foods that we cherish and that we honor. You know, and you think about, you know, as history unfolded itself and as we move forward in time, in 1970, you know, they had Dorsack Dam mitigation. And I'm speaking particularly just the history that I've been a part of, that, you know, when I talk about no fishing without fish, you know, I was born in 1970, and they, the North Fork of the Clearwater, they were closing that off forever. And my dad and my mother lived in Spokane, Washington at the time. And my dad was so engraved in that area, and that's where my grandpa Lewis was from, the North Fork. We called us original Cold Mountain Netspurs, Escapo. And so when they were going to take that land and that place of power away from us, my dad quit his job. I was born on June 5th. On June 11th, we were at the headwaters of the North Fork, and that's where I was baptized at. And so my dad, you know, my mother told me that I was probably the last person to ever see that water, the headwaters of the North Fork. So that's the part of the history of there's no more fishing without fish. And, you know, so the dams and the ripple effect of what they have done to our people, you know, that's one aspect of it, you know, where they inundated the North Fork and took that fishery away from our people. So now you go 10 more years forward in the history of our people and the Rapid River standoff of 1980. You know, I was a 10-year-old boy sitting on the banks of the Rapid River near Riggins, Idaho. And I remember vividly about seeing the cops and the Idaho Fish and Game. You know, they told us, why don't you guys put your nets or fish with your dip nets without a net on it? So that's a real concept of there's no fishing without fish. They were telling us how to fish. You know, I have this shirt today that shows a Netspurs fisherman inside of a salmon with a dip net. And they told us back then in 1980 that there was no fish returning, that you couldn't fish. And they wanted us to fish with our dip nets without nets on it. Well, on the other side of that was the brutality of it all. You know, I watched people get clubbed. I watched them get taken to jail. I watched my grandpa James Davis, he'd get handcuffed, and as he's looking at me and my older brother are sitting there crying, and he looks at me and looks down at me. And I remember it like it was yesterday. He stated to me, "Sonny, don't cry. One day you'll remember why I'm going to jail." And that stuck with me, and it resonated inside me. And it stuck with me, in a picture image that I'll never forget, because I remember now why he went to jail. He was fighting for our rights. And that's something that I always hold near and dear to my heart, because I think it's important that we understand what our people have endured over time in history. And then, so that was in 1980, and we fought to keep that fishery alive and fight for our rights. Now you move into, and I'll back up just a couple of years. In 1977, my father and uncle and my grandpa, we were going to the Imnaha River in Northeast Oregon. And it's the most beautiful place I've ever been to in my life. I can close my eyes and I can picture the trail leading up to Blue Hole on the Imnaha. And that's where the headwaters of the Imnaha River's at. And I was 7 years old, and I remember watching my dad and my grandpa and my uncles fish for these 50, 60 pound Chinook salmon, the summer hogs, the June hogs that were going up into the Blue Hole. And it's the most pristine, clear water that you can see as you walk along the trail and up along the banks. You can look down on the slopes and look down into the water, see how clear that water is. And you can see the schools of salmon that were fishing, that were swimming upstream, and we followed them. And at that time we used gunny sacks and we brought fish back, but in 1977, we went there for 3 or 4 years prior to that. But on 1977, my father and my grandpa realized that the salmon weren't coming back. And so to be a true steward of the resource and a true steward of the first foods, and as Mr. Suppah had alluded to, there were voices for the protection of those that can't speak for themselves. And so being a true conservative that we are, we chose not to go back to the Imnaha River. So fast forward to 1997, 20 years later, I took one of our now NEPTIC members at a young age, Casey Mitchell, with me over to the Imnaha River into the Blue Hole. And I hadn't been back there in 20 years, and I took himself and another individual, one of my cousins, and they had never been back there. And so for me, it was their circle had gone full tilt. And so I was able to wait 20 years to go back to that place that was so engraved in my heart and my mind, and the images that I remembered, and to go back and see that same place again, but it wasn't the same. The salmon didn't return like they were back then, so there was still more work to be done. And so, then, you also in the mid 90s is we had the coho ordeal, where the state of Idaho didn't want the Netspurs tribe to introduce coho salmon, and under the cloak of darkness and doing it just because we felt that we needed to provide more opportunities and provide these fish that were now going extinct to bring them back. And so the Netspurs tribe in the mid 90s did this, and it wasn't something that the state of Idaho took too kindly to, but the tribe still went forward. And that's the vision that we have, and the quest that we have to bring these fish back, is that regardless of one's opposition to what we're doing, you still want to provide and do what you can to make sure those things don't go extinct, because our ancestors endured so much for us to be here. We always pray for that next 7, 14, 21 generations to come to have what we have, and we still believe that. And so you look at the last couple of years, the Netspurs tribe doing what we have done for quite some time, is that we've done these studies, and we've brought forth the quasi-extinction, the word quasi-extinction, meaning the stocks of salmon in Idaho are at the threshold of being extinct. And there's all kinds of tangibles that play into this, and some are, you can put, at face value what they are, the industry itself, the management itself. Also, and the big thing that we all know, that we call them barriers, the dams. They create cesspools, and they create these areas where fish and predator fish, they lie in wait, and these smolts, when they come down, you have the avian predation, you have a number of things that come into play that have, been a part of this, the reduction in the runs, and it was the interest of the tribe to make sure that these didn't happen. And we knew that we had to do our part to help rejuvenate these runs that were going extinct, and they still are. We still have a lot of work ahead of you, as Mr. Simpson has stated, but, you go to these places, think about, what our ancestors have done to preserve that right. And so I think of them, when I talk about, what I'm doing and how I'm doing it. And, you talk about these places, we call them places of medicine power. You get this aura from them and, the smell of it, the look of it, you're not a bigger person, you do think about these places with medicine inside of you. And, you get these meadows that have never been touched, and you see the rivers and the streams, the beauty of them, and the smell, the silence, just to know that you're no bigger or no less. So those things are important to me. And you think about, some of the things that the state of Idaho has done under, and I say this not just to Idaho, there's other states as well, but, the headwaters of the Snake River and what I'm talking about in light of some of the things that happened during the Trump administration, where they've reduced and omitted some of the protections under environmental protection. And, water quality was the main one, and we want the fish to have the highest quality water that they come back to. So, I really want to speak in that realm that, there's a lot of work left to be done. Water's the blood of life, and it's the one thing that we need for these fish, and we need a free flowing river, and we'll do our part to keep up with Mr. Simpson and Mr. Lieberman and all the others that are involved in this fight to protect and to rejuvenate these fish runs and as we stated before, our treaties and what we do with them, it's for the betterment of all. It's not just for the Netspurs, it's not just for the Warm Springs, Yakima, or the Umatilla, it's for all, and everybody it benefits from that. And so, like I said, I just really appreciate this time to, I could say a lot more about, what we're talking about, and there's no fishing without fish, but I just wanted to give you a little bit of an insight and perspective from my point of view in terms of history and a little bit of how that relates to now. So again, Katsiaya for allowing me to be a part of this. So thank you.
Thank you, Eirk. That wonderful glimpse at history. I think it's not well known enough about the salmon wars that several tribes faced and continue to face. Of course, we fight our wars a little bit differently now, and that's why we continue to do what we do and advocate for those fish and live up to that promise we made to fight and speak on their behalf. Thank you for being here today. Up next, we have Aaron Lieberman. He is the Executive Director for Idaho Outfitters and Guides Association. Thank you for joining us today. Aaron?
Yeah, thank you so much. It's a tough couple people to follow, I gotta tell you. But I really appreciate what you had to say, Eirk and Congressman Simpson. So to start, thank you to the organizers, Kalani, Olivia. Thanks to my representative, Mike Simpson, for your uncommon integrity and foresight and political courage. I mean those things. And not least to the Netspurs tribe and the other Pacific Northwest tribes for your historic and ongoing stewardship of lands and wildlife and resources that the folks I represent also depend on and value. So as Kaylani said, my name is Aaron Lieberman. I'm the Executive Director of the Idaho Outfitters and Guides Association, or IOGA for short. It's a nonprofit statewide business trade association established in 1954, fittingly for this conversation, in Salmon, Idaho, dedicated to the conservation of and enhancement of quality outdoor experiences with Idaho's lands, waters, wildlife. I also had the honor of representing the outfitting and guiding community on as a member of Governor Little's Salmon and Steelhead work group. I am myself an outdoorsman, rafting and fishing guide, and spend time every year in the high elevation spawning grounds for these fish. I also come from a rural riverside town and understand the meaning and value of natural resources and species in and of themselves, including the impacts of their loss in those communities across the board. As far as I am here as a representative, I am here as a representative of the industry, and the industry I represent has long been negatively impacted by the decline in sport fishing opportunities for salmon and steelhead, economically, culturally, and socially. I guess I wrote down here something that ties in that I'd like to share. This is a comment from a outfitter, fishing outfitter based out of Salmon, Idaho, that he submitted to the governor's salmon recovery work group, and I think it captures the gist of what I'd like to speak to. He writes, "People are hurting here in Salmon, Idaho. Hotels are vacant in October. RV sites are empty. Gas stations are not filled with out-of-town plates filling up for weekend adventure, and fishing shops don't have answers as to why there are so few fish. I own a rafting company that used to fish for steelhead in Idaho's wilderness, and we have not booked a fishing trip for 3 seasons. I grew up fishing for steelhead with my grandpa, brother, uncle, and most importantly, my dad, who taught me all there is to know about steelhead fishing. It breaks my heart that I may not be able to take my kids fishing for Chinook salmon and steelhead as my father did with my brother and me, because we may not have enough fish in the coming years if dismal trends continue." To me, these comments and the many, many others like it reflect a couple key things. One is the importance of salmon and steelhead fishing to rural communities in Idaho and more broadly, and the importance of salmon and steelhead fishing to rural, or to our culture's continuity and sense of self in these places. So to just start things off on the economic front, I'll throw a couple of figures out. To start, a 2001 Fish and Game economic study on salmon and steelhead angling reckoned that in Riggins, a town with still less than 500 people, a single limited spring Chinook season generated $10 million, representing at the time 23% of Riggins' gross receipts for the year. Adjusted for inflation, that's about $13.5 million in 2018 dollars. On the whole, recent studies indicate that, this is from the American Sport Fishing Association, that the general non-outfitted sport fishing economy contributes an estimated $757 million per year in Idaho alone. And extrapolating from estimates from Idaho Department of Fish and Game regarding proportionate angling effort for salmon and steelhead, that would extrapolate to a base contribution of between $151 to $189 million per year to the state for salmon and steelhead fishing. Salmon and steelhead outfitters and guides, for their part, contribute an estimated $180 million to Idaho each year. And importantly, at least on the guiding front, 80% roughly of Idaho's resident outfitters and guides live in and operate out of communities with an average population of 500 or fewer, which I bring up only to say that the impact of those dollars is disproportionately higher and more important to central Idaho's rural riverside communities. The common thread that I think these figures speak to is that anadromous fish and recreational fisheries are critical, not just to the vitality of the economies in many of these Northwest and Idaho towns, but to their very survival. With the retreat of more traditional extractive industries, like mining, logging, across the Pacific Northwest, outdoor recreation tourism has bloomed and become that much more crucial to the economies it supports. The industries and economies built around salmon and steelhead within this sector are significant. Towns like Riggins, Challis, Kamei, Orofino, Kuski, and on, they all epitomize both in metaphor and fact, I think, the shifting currents of history, ecology, economy, and culture that connects these fish to rural communities, rural economies, and to the outfitted fishing industry that I represent. Nevertheless, the people in these communities continue to watch the downward arc of Idaho salmon and steelhead populations somewhat helplessly. In places like this, and this is where it speaks to the cultural element, reduced opportunity and loss of traditions such as fishing impact the number of each successive generation that sticks around or returns home to maintain the spirit, values, and memory of a place. Fishing, outfitting, and guiding is a defining feature, I'd argue, and component of identity across the region, not least in Idaho. And as our fish and opportunities to fish decline, these communities are losing not only their economic foundation, but their sense of who they are. You know, if I'm not a fisherman, who am I? If I'm not a fishing guide or outfitter, what do I do? They're tied into the sense of home, sense of place, sense of self, and we stand to lose some of those things. Not entirely, but in a meaningful way. In this state, in my state, younger generations of rural Idahoans are not staying in rural Idaho. As recreation came to supplant those traditionally extractive industries that I spoke to, and as the fish populations continue to decline, younger generations of Idahoans are seeking opportunities elsewhere where they might have otherwise stayed home. So salmon and steelhead and the recovery of anadromous fish is critical, not just in economic terms, but also critical to our our identity, cultures, sense of place here in Idaho and the rural Northwest. And for this conversation, tribes, outfitters, guides, and rural communities we all call home can do a disproportionate share of the burdens of for those impacts of the hydro system and its associated industries, mechanics, loss of livelihood, cultural continuity, generational collapse. For these reasons, and not to diminish the moral imperative of forestalling the extinction of a species, the Idaho Outfitters and Guides Association, who I represent, has for over 2 decades supported the retirement of the lower Four Snake River dams as the single most viable means to restore abundant populations of anadromous fish. And for that reason, as soon as Congressman Simpson released the outlines of his concept, the IOGA was fully there in support and remain fully in support. I know I'm probably rambling already, so I'll try to bring it home here. Several years ago, someone shared a metaphor with me, actually someone that Congressman Simpson here knows well, that I think illustrates the situation we're in pretty aptly. They said, it's like this: we're on a plane that's going down, and we have a choice to either acknowledge that that's happening and land it, or to deny that that is happening and go up in flames in the crash. That might seem a little bit dramatic, but I think the point carries through. And here, what remains for us is decide whether or not we will land a plane or let it crash. And that's, I'll quote Congressman Simpson here again: we've tried everything. We have tried everything to bring these fish back. And there are bigger issues at play, bigger than fish, the BPA and others, that we need to solve, which is hard to say from somebody who represents fishing outfitters and guides, but it's true. The good news is that we can do that. It's complex, without a doubt. There are mountains to move. The good news is we have the technology, we have the expertise, and we can choose to exert the will. Hard things are hard, but we can still do hard things. And as I like to think of it, we put a man on the moon, we split the atom, we've done impossible things every single day. If you look it up, we do impossible things on a daily basis. Humans are incredibly ingenious. We can do this. Comparatively, none of the things that we'd have to replace, none of the investments, concessions, assurances, compared to the things we've already done and can do any given day. We can do all those things. We just have to choose to do so. And I know that people have questions. I talk to those people. I know that they have concerns, and they should have concerns. It's a big concept. It's a big issue. But I hope that we can take those questions, continue to take those questions to each other, to our neighbors, whether down the road or in a different state, and do so in the spirit of finding answers. Because so much of what I hear, so much of people talking about is reasons why not. So fears informing why not to do a thing, the costs of change. And I get it, change is scary, change is big. Restoring the snake and recovering salmon is big, but we can also do big things. And we can do this big thing if we choose to. So people talk about the costs, and we're paying those costs already. We're subsidizing transportation, we're subsidizing BPA, an unappropriated federal bureaucracy with a monopoly over the movement of electrons that is nevertheless bleeding money. We are subsidizing a failing system. There's a place in Idaho up in the mountains that pays about $6 million to BPA per year. $2 million of that is for the benefit of having fewer fish, which they also rely on economically. So beyond the lost economic opportunity that's critical to fish-dependent economies, we're also paying quite literally. And then on top of that, we're subsidizing the systems that are no longer competitive or no longer paying for themselves. So we're paying in terms of lost opportunity. We're paying in the sense that the kid who grows up in your rural town is now going to Boise or Las Vegas or somewhere else because the traditional opportunity is no longer there. We're paying for it in lost traditions and cultural values. And so when we talk about costs, I think we should talk about the costs of the current system, or the costs of doing nothing to local economies, to the industry I represent, to our culture, to our traditions, and to the idea of future opportunity. Finally, when we talk about the future, I'm hopeful that we can do a better job of thinking not just about what we want to hold on to or what we're afraid of, but about the best of all possible futures and the one we choose to make. Because the thing is, there's no doubt that this is happening. The Snake River dams will be removed, whether beginning next year or in 10 years. That is happening. That's true. What's unclear is whether we will acknowledge that fact, embrace the opportunities for investment and renewal around restored lower Snake River and healthy salmon populations before it's too late. I just say in Congressman Simpson's Columbia Basin Initiative, IOGA, and I, for my part, believe that we may, for the first time, have a framework that accounts for those needs and assurances in a comprehensive and realistic way. And I just end by saying we're on this issue and on so many issues, we are all so much better than we pretend to be. And we can do big things, we can do hard things, we can move those mountains. We shook the world to install the structures and electrify the American West to fight the Nazis. It was hard, it was expensive, but we can do hard things, and we can sure do expensive things. And I think there's a better future beyond that choice for that provides reliable, affordable power, grain transportation, water supply, abundant populations of salmon and steelhead for generations to come. And that outfitters guides the tribes, water users, rural communities, rural utilities, and folks like Congressman Simpson here can help us get there.
Excellent words, Aaron. Thank you so much for providing those. These are the conversations that need to be had. They can be challenging conversations. We've done things the same way for so long. Many of us know it's not working, and those are the conversations that need to be had to inform and enlighten everyone else that seems to think status quo is okay. It's not. And we thought it vital to bring the fishing industry into this because we have several tribes that rely on their fishing industry. Fishing's a skill that many of us do not have. And so there are folks that utilize that skill and they feed their families that way. You know, there's more ways to feeding families than just farm and agriculture. The salmon and other fish species are a big part of that. Another piece that I just wanted to acknowledge too was I've been on different fishing guide tours, and I greatly appreciate the accurate history that they provide about the tribes in those regions. And that's an element that can be lost to the folks touring and visiting those areas. So thank you, Aaron. Thank you so much for being on today.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
We're going to close out this session with our last speaker. I'm honored to introduce Don Sampson, the Executive Director for the Confederated Tribes of the Umatilla Indian Reservation. Thanks for joining us, Don.
Thank you, Kaylani. Thank you, Eirk. Aaron, Representative Simpson, appreciate your powerful words. And I think it's important as well as to thank Ron Suppah, my brother from Warm Springs, who reminds us of the law, what we call Tamunwit, the law that we follow, and the law that has been on this land and still is on this land from the beginning of time until the end of time. And that is the importance that we respect nature, we respect each other, and we provide reciprocal relationships. It's not just we take and take, but we give back. And I think that's an important part of the lesson that people sometimes forget, is that we have this relationship to this land. It provides the salmon, provides the water, provides the soil that farmers use, the water that provides that nourishment. It benefits all of us. And I think that's an important part. And I think how we find that balance is really what we're seeking here today. It's something I've been working on for quite some time. My Indian name is Pio Pio Mox Mox. I'm the hereditary chief of the Walla Wallas, but I'm also the executive director of the Umatilla tribe. My family comes from Wallula, near the mouth of the Walla Walla, where my grandmother was born, and my grandfather was born at the mouth of the Tucannon River, at the Snake River. And so many of our family who are Palouse come from there. So I think it's important to talk a little bit about the work that we've done, the impacts to fishing, the fishing industry. As when I was younger, I was a commercial fisherman on the Columbia River. And there was a time in the 70s and 80s where our tribal fishermen were able to actually make a living off the harvest of salmon, including the fish that came from the Snake River. That was a big contribution to the overall fishing of our tribes. But that's changed so much, so drastically. And I just want to reference a report that was done. I used to be the head of the Columbia River Intertribal Fish Commission, which was the Yakima, Netspurs, Warm Springs, and Umatilla tribes back in 1990. And we established and created a plan then to look at removing the 4 lower Snake River dams, because at that time we saw the impacts. We had already seen the historic impacts. And so we commissioned a report that was done in April of 1999. And part of that report is called The Tribal Circumstances and Impacts of the Lower Snake River Dams on the Netspurs, Yakima, Umatilla, Warm Springs, and Shoshone-Bannock. And I'd urge you to look at that, and I can provide reference to that. But they assess the impacts from what we call the amount of salmon that our tribes caught. Pre-contact, before Europeans came to this country, they estimated over 178 million pounds of salmon were harvested by these tribes, these 5 tribes alone. And it was over 40% of their daily diet. So it was hugely important. It's like the potato in Ireland or rice in Asia. It was so important. It's the wheat. So that was such a critical part of our food base, but also our commerce and our spiritual belief. But by the 1850s, when the treaties were signed, it had dropped from 178 million pounds to 70 million pounds. And so a huge reduction in just a short period of time. So access to the rivers was a lot of overfishing that was already beginning to occur and affected the salmon populations. And then came after, of course, the era of irrigation and dams and all of the development that occurred. And we see these declines even continue to drop. And we, during this period of time, we saw nearly a 90% reduction in our salmon harvest, 90%. Imagine any industry going through that today. You would see huge bailouts happening left and right. And so that's been a huge impact. And today, many of these tribes are getting less than 0.5% of what their actual fishing needs are for just subsistence, just to have a few fish to eat in your on the table, to carry on the tradition, to carry on the customs of learning to become a fisherman. And so I think that's been a huge impact to us. You know, as a commercial fisherman, you know, those days have long gone, and we are only really trying to subsistence. At least that's my family. And I would fish with Eirk and our family, all the Holts, in the Grand Round River, which is a once very productive river that we have worked so hard and long to try to restore these salmon populations. In places like the Lostine River, where we, if it hadn't been for the tribes trying to sustain just the remnants of those runs, they would be extinct right now. But the work of the tribes has been critical. And we have proven in many places that we are successful in making the salmon recovery effort happen. And we are able to balance these approach. For many years, I was a biologist here at the tribe, as former chairman of the tribe, but we worked on salmon restoration. And if you go back and look at the Umatilla Basin, you know, we had an issue of dewatering the rivers because of agriculture, farm practices, irrigation. And we worked with the irrigators. We worked with the farmers in the community. And a great senator named Mark Hatfield stepped up and he says, if you guys can work this out, I will carry the ball for you. I will make sure that we get appropriations to provide water for irrigation, but also water for the river so that salmon can live again in this river, and we will help you restore those salmon populations. And over about a 40-year period, with a lot of hard work, sitting down and very difficult discussions, we figured out how to mitigate the farm and agricultural community. And we figured out that we could provide their water in a different source. And in exchange, they kept that water in the river. And while we were supplementing these salmon populations, some who had gone extinct, with hatchery, genetically correct hatchery populations, rebuilt the habitat. Indeed, we found in creating passage for these fish, we found that we rebuilt those runs from 1,500 and many who had gone extinct to nearly 40,000 in just a short period of 30 years. So that's the kind of work that we can do. And of course, you know, we have developed this comprehensive plan that Representative Simpson has put together to work with the farming and agricultural communities. You know, they're our neighbors. We want to be good neighbors. We want to make sure that they have mitigation. We don't want them to see the losses that we went through, what I just described. Imagine that. 90% of your economic base is destroyed. And we don't want that. We want them to be whole. We want to work with them as partners. Same way with transportation, the same way with electric and energy production. And I think there's going to be benefits beyond just what we've thought about locally, but for the tribes and for tourism and recreation. Part of the analysis that was done in 1999 looked at the reestablishment of fishing sites along the lower Snake River. And this proposal would reestablish usually custom fishing sites for many of our tribes, but also other people along 150 miles of the river. That's a huge benefit. Imagine that. Restore hunting and gathering areas, not just for our tribes, but for people in the Northwest. 33,890 acres restored for hunting, gathering of traditional foods for us, particularly roots, berries, plants. It would also add land-based opportunities. So imagine it, it's almost 1/3 the size of the present Netspurs land holding on the reservation, or it's almost 1/5 the size of our tribal reservation. So it's a huge amount of land that would be restored back to the Northwest. And last, it would also reestablish contact and use of over 600 to 700 usual and custom locations. As I mentioned, my family came from Tucannon, and there are many sacred village sites, archaeological sites, historic sites that are along that river that we have, again, access to. So these are some of the benefits that we don't really think about. A lot of times we talk about the replacement services of the dams, and we look at transportation, we look at energy, and we look at irrigated agriculture. But there are other benefits that I think are much longer term and will really kind of address some of the impacts that our people have seen. So our people here at Umatilla are excited to engage with people in our community, our neighbors, talk about the opportunity that we will support for mitigation to those communities, because we want to see the same thing. We went through the same thing. We understand that impact. And we want to be good neighbors. We want to be able to restore the river, restore salmon, but also keep those economies in place and strong, and perhaps even grow. Imagine the investments along these rivers we can make. So that's our perspective about it. I really appreciate the time to speak today. The Umatilla tribe looks forward to working with the coalition of tribes, with our congressional delegation, the administration, the Biden administration, but also those communities in agriculture, in energy, in transportation, so that we can find the solutions that will make them whole as well. So I just want to thank you today and appreciate the invitation. It's good to hear you all. And like everybody's saying, we work together, we can get this done.
Thank you, Don, and thank you for joining us and being able to make the time. And it's true, we need people, we need folks to step up and say we can do this and look at alternatives for the future. It's possible. We can do big things, just as Aaron mentioned. I just want to take a moment to thank you all again for joining us today. We do have our next speaker series on March 16th, and we are looking forward to Yakima Nation hosting that one. We also are looking at a couple options for future series. We also have the Shoshone-Bannock tribe looking to host one. We also might be having an opportunity to host a speaker series live and in person. So stay tuned. The best way to do that is keeping track of the Salmon Orca Project social media through Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. We have our website at thesalmonorcaproject.com. Through there, you can also find the call to action to send letters to your local legislators, encouraging them to support this movement. And lastly, continue to have those conversations, though difficult. Encourage you to have those conversations with your friends and family and explain what this would mean. And now is the opportunity for us to have some say in how that's done before it comes to it just being thrown at us and saying, this is what's happening, the dams are going. We got to look at that difference between certainty and uncertainty. And I appreciated the conversations we had a couple of weeks ago with local legislators on what that means. Right now, we have a chance to have a say in that. That might not be the case going forward. But one thing's for sure is something's going to change, and we can do something about it now or later. But right now, we have a chance to do more than just breach those dams. So I look forward to everybody tuning in next month. Stay safe, and we'll see you then.